welcome back to the program. And that's the first port of call for us this morning, the Naira for crude policy of the federal government, of course, which has been projected by Mr. President to remove the foreign exchange hurdle and, reduce pressure on the Naira. Of course, in pursuit of this particular story, we've also reached out to the crude oil refiners to see just how democratic this policy is beyond the crude for Naira for crude sale to Dangote refinery to see how it spreads also to other refiners. Of course, some of the reports that we're getting in that regard, they're not so encouraging, but we hope to bring them on the show subsequently such that they can speak for themselves. But what also is the impact of this policy, amongst others, on other aspects of the economy? Joining us to have this conversation this morning is Economist Mr. Kelvin Emmanuel. Good morning and welcome, Mr. Emmanuel, to the program.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming through. So let's start with, some of the concerns expressed on the floor of the Senate. We heard Senator Sani Musa speaking there on what it would mean for the medium-term expenditure framework, that is usually projected for about 2 years, 2024 to 2026. And of course, we also know that the annual budget is always predicated on the amount of the crude oil per barrel sold in dollars. So what are your projections in this regard?
Well, I'll tell you that since January of 2024, NNPC has barely remitted dividends to the Federation account. I think that's a source of concern for Nigerian Senate. They've been remitting taxes as is statutory for all companies registered under the Company and Allied Matters Act. But dividends, they've not been remitting because, NNPC is a private company owned 100% by the federal government of Nigeria, the federating units, but they've not been remitting dividends. When they did declare profits for the 2023 financial year for lifting 196 million barrels of crude oil, as against 275 million barrels of crude oil they were supposed to lift. I'd mentioned that those profits were paper profits. The NNPC put out a statement that said, that this is the highest profits they've ever declared since PIA was announced in 2021. And I said they are paper profits because they can't produce the money to the government. And then a few weeks after, they came out and acknowledged that they were owing international traders $6.8 billion through modified carrier agreements that have been structured for vendor financing to swap Nigeria's crude oil under the 196 million barrels, which is supposed to be 275, by the way, for bringing in PMS into Nigeria. And that the profits that they declared were actually used to defray the cost of subsidy, And so the Senate is right to be concerned. This Senate Committee on Finance is right to be concerned about the Naira-based crude oil swaps. However, I'll tell you that with the introduction of Dangote refinery and the deal that has been struck, even if the government has not been 100% compliant with that arrangement in delivering the cargoes that were expected, because anywhere between 10 and 12 million barrels of crude oil were expected on a monthly basis under that plan. The government has not been very compliant. And as a matter of fact, not all the cargoes under that plan is actually supplied in Naira. I think only about 50 or 60% of the cargoes are supplied in Naira, despite the fact that the compliance rate is anywhere between 45 and 50% of the 12 million barrels on a monthly basis. You expect that if the government achieves full compliance under that plan agreed by the technical subcommittee, you're going to see anywhere around 8 trillion naira in 2025 remitted to the Federation account directly. And that will be remitted. The transparency will be better because no longer will NNPC be able to tell the federal government of Nigeria that they are deferring subsidy. because at the current recommended retail price of premium motor spirit in Nigeria, NNPC is not paying any under recovery. And this is one of the reasons why I have encouraged and have been a strong advocate against continuing what I call the rackets of bringing in imported products into Nigeria at a landing cost that is not defined. The landing price at which they bring in products into Nigeria is actually the landing price quoted for premium gasoline. But when you look at the quality of gasoline brought, it's far from premium. So there's a disconnect in terms of the honesty or price discovery in terms of the landing cost of per liter of PMS into Nigeria. We need to go towards backward integration and realize that at 32 million liters that Dangote refinery is producing today has the capacity to feed Nigeria, because Nigeria doesn't consume 55 million liters of PMS as bandied around by the government.
So let me quickly follow up on that. So can we afford to the Naira for crude transaction if we still require so much more dollars to offset the debt? On the one hand, the debt that the NNPCL is owing its own international oil partners, and of course the other debt that Nigeria is owing, to its other international partners across the country.
Well, you see, if you look at the crude intervention stock, is 445,000 barrels of crude oil that was set aside under the Domestic Crude Oil Supply Obligation, Sections 109 of the Petroleum Industry Act. It's in the law. If you look at it, you will realize that in 2023, Nigeria did 537 million barrels of crude oil under the crude oil fiscalized output. Nigeria is supposed to have 51.3% of that output at 275 million barrels. That's why I said 196 million that they are lifting is not the true north of what they are supposed to lift. 10 years ago, Nigeria was doing fiscalized crude oil output of anywhere between 750 and 800 million barrels. It's dropped from 2.1 million barrels, 2.2 million barrels per day down to 1.4, 1.35, and so forth. So if you say, can we afford, under the crude oil program, Naira-based crude oil sales, you're looking at 144 million barrels of crude oil on a yearly basis under that program. And you're looking at the fact that Nigeria is supposed to be lifting anywhere between 275 and 300 million barrels of crude oil on a yearly basis. So Nigeria can definitely afford that program, because if this is done right, and if we stop giving FX to importers to bring in substandard products into Nigeria, what you're going to see is you're going to see less pressure on even the domestic refiner looking for dollars to pay for crude oil feedstock in Nigeria, which is, part of the issues that we're currently having with the exchange rate. Nigeria does not have the external reserves to do balance of payments. So you have to stop putting too much pressure. Because if you give crude oil feedstock to the refiner refines, he supplies the market. The excess is going to export. Diesel is going to export, because Nigeria can't consume the diesel that it produces on a daily basis 100%. Aviation fuel is going to export. Non-transportation fuels like polypropylene, polyethylene crystals from petrochemical feedstock is going to export. All of those derivatives, petroleum coke is going to export, is going to bring it as net export proceeds. Because now you're moving your strategy, your midstream strategy, from producing crude oil, exporting raw crude oil, to giving some of that crude oil to your refiner to produce. He supplies your markets. Yeah, he exports, he brings the dollars he sells from exporting to your markets to do balance of payment through autonomous NAFEX market to do balance of payments. So there is enough dollars in circulation to see that the exchange rate is balanced. Today, the external reserve, the net external reserve, the central bank keeps banding $40 billion. I'll tell you, net external reserves is not more than $6 billion because the CBN, their balance sheet is encumbered. The net external reserves you have with their external asset managers, which are about 6 banks, 6 international banks, is not more than $6 billion. So your net external reserve is practically not up to your 1-year balance of payments. How do you stabilize your exchange rates? You need the companies who produce on a massive and commercial scale to produce, to export, and bring dollars back for you to do those balance of payment settlements. So yes, we can afford it. And yes, we can go forward to increasing both the tax and non-tax to GDP ratio and reduce the deficit financing in the budget, which is very, very critical. Because if you look at the fact that NNPC has not remitted any money since January, and you consider the impact that has on how much revenue the government has generated for 2024 to how much deficit it has, 28 trillion naira, which is its budget for 2024, then you understand why our debt to GDP ratio is currently at 52%, 12% higher than the fiscal responsibility ratio set by the Fiscal Responsibility Commission.
All right, Mr. Emmanuel, we'll talk about this gross and net reserve that is incumbent that you put at $6 billion. But I guess the reason for bucking the trend in trying to sell crude in Naira is perhaps for the general population or consumers like me, is to make sure that this is available as much as possible, is affordable as much as possible, lessen pressure on FX so that imports, which we're highly dependent on, is reduced as much as possible. I'm talking about strengthening the Naira as a byproduct of all of this. But let's go back to the books in terms of the cash flow of the NNPCL. So from what you know, because NNPCL has always said perhaps the reason why they are not remitting dividends is because they are defraying the cost of subsidy or their shortfall. Now that is out of the way. So is NNPCL still being owed by the federal government, or the federal government is owing NNPCL? That's the first question.
Well, so I've always, Geoffrey, I've always asked for the federal government to order forensic audit into the books of NNPCL because, if, for example, the NNPC is going to be sent to the markets, it first has to determine the actual state of its balance sheets before anybody is going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So if you order like an audit, a forensic audit, not just an audit, a forensic audit into the books of NNPCL, and you look at the activities of Duke Oil, before Duke Oil was transformed into NNPC Trading. And then you look at the activities of NNPC Trading, the activities of NOPIMS, the activities of NEPL, as regards using Nigeria's crude oil feedstock to do swap or modified carrier agreements to bring in PMS into Nigeria, which is basically what they call vendor financing program. What are you going to find? Are you going to find a situation where the crude oil that is swapped for PMS is actually a value match? So the amount of PMS that Nigeria gets, is it equivalent to the amount of crude oil it gives to international oil traders? A curious thing I found, Geoffrey, in the MCA, the structure, a curious thing I found is that I found out that the difference between 51.3%, which is the cumulative average of what NNPC is entitled to as a joint venture holder of Nigeria's oil and gas assets upstream for deep water, mid-water, and onshore assets, to 36.7%. With the difference is 275 minus 196, which is about 79 million barrels. When I did the numbers, I multiplied by the official selling price for crude oil for 2023, which was $83 US. I found out that the 79 million barrels, which I think the government should question and ask, where did it go to? Multiplied by official selling price, actually $6.5 billion. It's almost equivalent to what international traders say they are owing. They are being owed, So the question I have is, how do you lift 196 million barrels? We're not being told where 79 million barrels has gone to, because you're supposed to leave 275 and the official selling price at $83, and you say you don't have money to pay the traders. So you have to order a forensic audit on the books, on the balance sheet of Duke Oil, which is now NNPC Trading, New PIMS, NEPL, for NNPC Retail, for you to determine who is owing who.
So
if NNPC is owing the federal government, or the federal government is owing NNPC.
Okay, so for now, we're not sure who is owing who as it is. But I want to break it, I want to go further as it affects all of us. So it may be a refresher course, because so that Nigerians will have a collective and general frame of reference, because this can be technical to a large extent. So let's go back from the very beginning. When the policy was implemented, the federal government saying, now, let's begin to sell crude oil, not in dollars, let's sell it in Naira. In terms of the overview, how was this supposed to benefit the Nigerian states and citizens who are consuming the end product? When we understand this, then we can understand why this is an important conversation. So help us out.
Well, under the Naira-based crude oil sales, the intention basically was for, crude oil to be sold to domestic refinery in Naira based on Section 109 of the PIA, and for the government to agree on a commercial framework where they will do a swap on that. The government gets a value match of a certain amount of PMS. But then the question is, number one, are the terms of those agreements being complied with? This was the reason why I said the level of compliance is low. Number two, is there an existing commercial framework that has been agreed between the federal government and the refinery, on this structure, So, and number three, the feedstock that is even being given to the refiner, is he actually giving in Naira? That's the question we should ask. The answer is no. So, it's easy for people to say, oh, Naira-based crude oil sales, Dangote refinery gets crude oil in Naira. But what are the actual details of what is going on right now under that program? It doesn't appear like the government is complying with the terms agreed in the program, because NNPC will come back to you and say, oh, they don't have the crude oil.
Kelvin, just a moment. So are you saying that policy has not been implemented, or is not? Is it that it has not been implemented, or is ineffective? Which of them is a problem here?
It's not being complied with to the letter, Geoffrey. Under the Naira-based crude oil sales, the Dangote refinery is supposed to be getting anywhere between 385,000 to 400,000 barrels of crude oil on a daily basis. He's not getting that. Yeah, even the amount of feedstock. Let me define it for you, Geoffrey. 385 to 400,000 barrels per day is anywhere between 11.5 to 12 million barrels on a monthly basis. He's probably getting anywhere around 40 to 50% of that. Even out of that 40 to 50% today, about 50% of the 50% he's getting that the technical subcommittee agreed on is actually sold to him in US dollars, not Naira. This is the reality. So is the government coming to tell the people the truth about it so that you don't put the blame on the Dangote refinery? Because the blame is not on the Dangote refinery.
So, Mr. Emmanuel, if I get you correctly, you say that we can afford this policy if every other thing in the books is taken care of. But I have to revisit that question in a different way. If we're currently producing 1.3 million barrels per day as at September, and at that Senate hearing where the Senate raised concerns about the impact of this policy on the budgetary framework, they go into a closed-door session. Where is the accountability element in this, such that we could have heard the questions that would have been put through to the NNPC? How many barrels of crude per day are we currently producing? What can we afford, to sell to Dangote refinery, such that we can still meet our obligations to our partners in the international community? I wonder if these, aspects of the conversation are as critical, to this conversation that we are having as well, Mr. Emmanuel.
Well, if you look at it, out of the 1.35 to 1.4 million barrels per day, Nigeria is getting anywhere around maybe 700,000 barrels on a daily basis. 51.3% of that output is due to the government. The Senate, is very unfortunate, because I'm extremely disappointed with the National Assembly. You look at the Project Gazelle deal, where they staked 164 million barrels of crude oil in exchange for $3.4 billion in cash, through what is called financialization of your assets. Yeah. When you look at the official selling price for 2023 and the average of 2024, 45 million barrels of crude oil will pay back that loan with interest. 45 million. Let me repeat. 45 million barrels of crude oil will pay back the $3.4 billion loan that the government took through Afrexim. Afrexim funded is a part of that loan. It will pay back that loan with the interest that was agreed at about 11.85% country risk premium plus the like 6%, so for secured overnight financing rate. So you have 5.85% as country risk premium, you have 6% as secured overnight financing rate, which totals 11.85% on $3.4 billion. 45 million barrels of crude oil pay back that. Well, how much did they stake? They staked 164 million. 164 million barrels, right? So you just do your calculation, 164 million by official selling price, just put it at $80 per barrel, for example, and ask, where's the money going to? I'll tell you what. Under the structure of that deal, they set up an offshore debt service reserve account in a tax haven that is not subject to appropriation or oversight by the National Assembly. Where was the National Assembly when they did that? Why didn't the Senate Committee on Finance raise an issue with that? Why didn't he raise alarm and call them for this thing and say, this is not going to go, it's not going to pass? Where were they? They were quiet. They were all quiet. That is part of the debt that is currently being repaid. You have Project Eagle, you have Project Bison, you have Project Yield. In 2019, when Melegiari became GCE of NNPC, I think the first loan that was structured was actually monies that were raised to pay Nigeria's share of equity in the Train 7. NLNG was opening FID on Train 7. Nigeria owns 49% of NLNG. NNPC is the nominee shareholder on behalf of the federal government of Nigeria. On the board of NLNG, they needed to make capital contribution. The first loan that was structured as a modified carry agreement where you secure cash from a multilateral development bank and financiers overseas, and then you tie a well with a specific number of barrels on a day as repayment with a moratorium period, was to pay Nigeria's share in the financing of Train 7 to increase the output by NLNG from 22 million metric tons to 30 million metric tons per annum. All of those deals, as the Senate opened a public inquiry to investigate the structure of those deals and see that Nigerians are not getting the short end of the stick, because all the commitments NNPC has to pay traders, to pay multilateral development banks through international traders are their collectors, came from all of those deals that have been structured. And in total, between 2019 and 2024, about $12 billion of that has been structured. Where's the National Assembly?
All right, Mr. Emmanuel, that's a big question for the National Assembly, and I hope that people like you will be called so that these questions can be asked as well. I'm quite curious as to whose table this responsibility should lie, because it looks like there's a lot of indebtedness across board, but we want to put it in the right places, because I know that when we took that 3.3 from Afrexim Bank, the statement from the federal government was to say that it was defraying taxes and royalties in advance. That's the language that was used at the end of the day. So that's why I'm trying to look at all the elements and encumbrances to know who is owing who and how much is being owed, besides all of these new concerns you've raised. But let's go even further and deeper into the conversation. I don't know what you know that is going on with the Port Harcourt refinery, because we need as much of this as possible if we want to be net exporter. Perhaps we can't depend on Dangote refinery alone. It's great with the backward integration, but the issue of energy security has to have multiple suppliers. What do you know is going on in that end as far as the refineries are concerned? Because I will always stay where the average Nigerians stay and are concerned about. They're not interested in all the big grammar we can speak and all the technicalities we can put forward. They're just interested in how they can get fuel as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, if that word is convenient for that particular sector right now with the deregulation. So what is going on with that area?
Well, Geoffrey, it's an interesting question you asked because I've always said on record that the government-owned refineries are dead on arrival. Government has not proven over the last more than 60 years of having the capacity to manage business. Nigeria discovered struck frost oil in Oloibiri in Ogdia local government in Bayelsa State in 1957, 67 years after Geoffrey. Nigeria's refiners are importing crude oil to refine. So the government-owned refineries are comatose, they are dead, Geoffrey. They are not going to come back to life. The NNPC, a Port Harcourt refining company, a PHRC, is a subsidiary of NNPC. They promised deadlines, more than 8 deadlines. They've not come up. You're not hearing anything from it. At the most, maybe they'll convert it into a blending plant to pure off-spec petrol. I don't know. Yeah, but I don't believe that those refineries are salvageable. I think the government needs to strip it down as a dead asset that is drawing cash, because you look at it's consuming anywhere between 75 and 100 billion naira in maintenance costs, staff costs that are not producing anything on a yearly basis. So the government should forget about it and focus on strengthening the regulations and framework for supply of feedstock to commercial refiners, and see how it can manage and regulate the laws that is set out in PI. I don't think that those refineries are going to come back to life. A few months ago, I reiterated again, I said those refineries are dead and they are gone forever. The NNPC came, made promise. So far, they've missed 2 deadlines since that. Where is it? So I think we need to move on. We need to accept the reality.
So what was going on?
We need to stop being
So all the deadline that was given, were they all political statements, or were so that we're not hasty in conclusion?
Of course, they were political statements. We're too attached to legacy assets. Ajaokuta steel plants, several other legacy assets that should be let go of. And government comes, makes promises, says it's FEC has approved allocation to turnaround maintenance, and it ends up as a drain down the hole. 12 trillion naira so far expended. At the exchange rate at which these monies were approved by FEC, the conversion is anywhere between $22 and $24 billion. That is enough to build another Dangote refinery in Lagos. So what are we talking about, Geoffrey? We need to let go. We need to stop being emotionally invested in those dead government refineries, because they are not coming back to life. It's just an expedition in futility.
Well, Mr. Emmanuel, some would say that maybe the Port Harcourt refinery is in fact working and has in fact produced petrol, but for some reason, government has chosen not to announce that the Port Harcourt refinery has begun working and is able to produce petrol. Whatever that reason is, we do not know. And, speculations would be a perfect waste of time at this particular point in time. But the overall, whatever policy the government is implementing is for the benefit of the people, is for Nigeria to exit this regime of importation of petrol. But what we're seeing is a price dispute between, on the one hand, Dangote refinery and major marketers, independent marketers. So what is the essence of this Naira for crude policy if we're still importing and if we're having this continuous price war, between the marketers of the product itself?
So, the marketers of the product, the price war we're having is because they don't seem to understand what sections 317, 711 of the PIA says on the quotas that the regulator and MDPRA should give to marketers to be able to lift and import products into Nigeria, and the quality specifications, which are ground rules. The example I gave to give Nigerians context on this is, in pharmaceutical manufacturing, there's what is called good manufacturing practice, GMP, set by the World Health Organization, WHO. There is a basic framework and minimum standard expected of pharmaceutical manufacturers globally. It's a basic framework. If you go outside of that WHO guidelines, then you're subject to punitive measures from regulators all over the world. And the question is, do you say that because you're trying to deliver pharmaceutical products at a cheaper price to consumers, you're going to risk their health? Because poor quality PMS actually has health implications. Sulfur, that's a very high sulfur. When you use too much sulfur to cure PMS and you have sulfur level above the framework that has been set by the regulator, it actually has chronic long-term health impacts on the people. And this is something you will realize if a public health inquiry were commissioned into the effect of high sulfur in petrol on the health of Nigerians, not just their cars, but on their health, So, because generator fumes, of course, and you have a lot of Nigerians who use generators. So there's a minimum framework that has been set, and that framework was decided by ECOWAS in 2020 at the convention they held that says that the sulfur level for PMS that has been agreed by all ECOWAS member countries is actually 50 parts per million, 50 ppm. That's the minimum framework. The PMS imported into Nigeria, if it's subjected to actual ASTM tests, ASTM is a gasoline testing standard that was developed by the American Society of Testing and Materials. It's the most respected globally. Be subjected to ASTM tests. Yeah, and there is a level of verification to verify the result is actually higher than 500 and 1,000 parts per million. So what's the gap between 50 and over 500 and 1,000 parts per million? That's number one. On the pricing framework, okay, you have to understand that when you deregulate the market according to sections 205 of the PIA, you have that framework go under the Platts system of pricing. Platts is a global system that prices LNG, that prices PMS, that prices LPG, that prices crude oil all over the world. There is a basic amount per metric ton for PMS on real-time basis, and that is determined by mostly location, the blend of the crude, and the price of crude oil on the global markets per time. Yeah. So you have your Platts, you have your premium that is imposed, and then you have all your logistics and taxes. So if you look at the PMS pricing framework, you realize that other than the Platts and premium, there's everything from finance cost and the massa, there's shuttle vessel, there's bulk storage terminal or tank farms that you have, there's demurrage. And this is primarily because Nigeria does not have pipeline infrastructure to evacuate PMS from a refiner. Musimi and Atlas Cove and Moribond, they're no longer in operation. And in 2019, NNPC, you put it on hold because there was no sabotage of that pipe. So when you look at the PMS pricing framework, you have to consider, and to the question you asked, the government supplies most of its crude oil, the refiner buys crude oil in US dollars. It has to work under that Platts system. Under the technical subcommittee, is there a commercial framework for the PMSC that the government supplies crude oil for in Naira? There's no commercial framework. These are the questions the Federal Executive Council has to answer.
All right. It appears that that document is critical, for studying, to understand, all of the dynamics of the policy. Either it's a Naira for crude, or in fact, if it's the price war that is ongoing between Dangote and the petroleum marketers. Thank you so much, Mr. Kelvin Emmanuel, for your insights on this conversation and for always coming through.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, Mr. Kelvin Emmanuel is an economist. From the economy now, we turn our attention to security, and that will come your way after this break. Join us again.